You mean you were taxing me to push an ideological agenda that I despise? Not only was I subject to it, I was funding it? Yes, you were.
So our problem's not just going to be the Democrats, not just going to be Chuck Schumer and a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. It's going to be our own Republicans who liked the old ways.
There's going to be a lot of things that DOGE does that from the outside looking in, it's like, well, this is stupid, just get rid of it. And it's like, okay, no, you need to work with us so we can show you the process for how you can actually achieve it.
The objective is to lock in the DOGE savings and DOGE reforms. Unfortunately, there would have to be Democrat votes. That's why it's going to be hard to do.
We know there's fraud, we know there's waste, we know there's abuse, we know DOGE is doing things. How the heck are we supposed to track what is going on? So many people watching this are going to be like, great, I understand a little bit more about the process. What do I do? Before we get going, we would be remiss if we didn't mention that we always go to Ground News in order to conduct our research for interviews like this. In fact, we found this article about U.S. House Democrats who say that NOAA cuts will harm weather forecasting, fisheries, and Navy operations. Now, this story is kind of a blind spot for the right because no one on the right is actually writing about it. The left is getting away with not asking the question of, were these jobs actually needed? Or can the NOAA operate as efficiently while spending less tax dollars to provide the same services? And you can find all of these articles conveniently located right there on Ground News, especially because they have a Department of Government Efficiency topic page that consolidates all articles related to what DOGE is doing. Ground News is a website and an app that gathers related articles in one place so that you can compare headlines, helping you to understand not just what's happening, but who's telling the story and why. So if, like us, you are somewhat frustrated about the way that typical search engines curate the news where you only get one perspective, go over to ground.news/DOGE and check out all the different features they provide. In fact, if you go over there right now to ground.news/DOGE, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which will give you access to all the features you need to keep track of everything that is going on. All right, today we're talking with my good friend, Congressman Ben Cline. Ben Cline and I actually served together in the Virginia House of Delegates. And the reason why I'm talking to him today is because he serves on a couple of committees that are absolutely essential with respect to the budget. You remember that big fight about the continuing resolution? Well, that's passed. Now we got to look to the next one. And if we want to make sure that DOGE's cuts make it in to the House and Senate versions of the budget, Delegate Ben Cline is going to play an important role. So we ask him today about what that role actually looks like. Let's get to it. When I first came in to the Virginia House of Delegates back in 2016,
Long time ago.
2016, Delegate Ben Cline's office was across from mine. And anytime I had a question, I could go over and get sound advice. Well, let me rephrase this.
I wasn't giving you advice on how to get along. I was corrupting you very early to be part of the revolution, so to speak.
Look, I remember sitting there and we're about to vote on the Virginia budget. And I've been told, oh, you've always got to vote for the budget. You've always got to vote for the budget. Except by Delegate Ben Cline, who was like, we don't got to vote for this. There's too much spending. There's no tax cuts. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he's right. Vote no. Like, oh, there's four of us. But it's a testament to the fact that you were always someone that was very focused on reducing the size and influence of government, keeping it focused on the things it was supposed to do, and otherwise giving money back to the people.
We didn't have Freedom Caucus wasn't invented yet. We had a conservative caucus, which I drug you into, but yeah, we were freedom before freedom, and it's still a fight. Although we were in the majority when I was chair of the conservative caucus, and you were in there, but after I left, it all fell apart and we lost the majority, and you're struggling in the minority right now. You're close, one seat away, but let me tell you, after being in Nancy Pelosi's majority and being in the minority, it's much better being in Mike Johnson's majority and a majority where we can get stuff done with the Senate and with Donald Trump in the White House. This is the only 2 years of my 6 past years that I've actually felt optimistic about.
Well, and I think, I always joke that if you've been in politics for more than 45 seconds, you've been disappointed. And if you're a Republican in politics, it was probably only 10 seconds before you got disappointed. And that's always been the question, like, is it real this time? And one of the things that I think has made it real for a lot of people is DOGE. It's watching what DOGE is doing. But again, we've had this conversation with our audience so many times. There is only so much DOGE can do, because after all, DOGE just makes recommendations.
That's right.
They don't have firing authority. They're not cutting budgets. And there's only so much the executive branch can do. And that frustrates some people, but I always like to remind them, like, well, wait a second, we have separation of powers for a reason. Mm-hmm. And what this does is it means that at some point, Congress is going to have to step up and do a ton of the heavy lifting. Anything that we really want to be permanent from this can't be done by DOGE, can't be done by the president, has to be done by Congress. And so one of the things that you just had the continuing resolution vote, and there was some controversy over that. But the big question now is like, okay, the vote's over. We're going through, we're viewing ahead to fiscal year 26, but you guys have to do all the work starting now in order to get things ready for September. So here's the first question. If we got to wait till September to actually incorporate some of what DOGE is finding into a budget and into some of the structural changes that we want to see, what does the work look like on the House side in places like appropriations and the House Budget Committee between right now and September?
So right now, the House Appropriations Committee is negotiating with the Senate Appropriations Committee and the White House about what's called the top line number, which is the big number that then gets broken up into subcommittees. Unlike the Virginia House, where we had one big budget that funded everything, the House and Senate in Congress break it up into 12 appropriations bills. So one is for agriculture, one is for housing, transportation, and a big one is labor, health and human services, and education, which is all mushed into one bill. But anyway, those conversations they start after you get a top line number, and then appropriations breaks that into here's how much each subcommittee gets. Okay. And then they start appropriating.
Let me ask you a question on that. So one of the things I always tell my constituents when they come to visit me during session is like, look, we have 100 delegates in Richmond. You got 435 members of the House up here. And you see it, we get the form letters like, oh, you better do this. And you're like, cool. And if I ever see that bill, I will be happy to do that. But it's not in my subcommittee. It's not in my committee. The only way I'll ever see it if it's on the floor. And a lot of people are like, okay, I want to understand the process, but then where should I be really paying attention? So is it on the separate 12 subcommittees that handle all these bills?
For the spending, yes. And then, as you know, there are spending bills, and then there are authorizing bills. So the authorizing bills go through all the different full committees. So there's a committee on transportation. If you want to build a highway, authorize a highway to be built, go through there. If you want to fund the building of the highway that's been authorized, you got to go through appropriations. So two-step process. So a lot of the bills that we see that are getting attention that have to do with reforming government, reforming the way that the executive branch works, getting rid of the Department of Education. That goes to the House Committee on Education, chaired by Virginia Fox. She is one of the most tenacious chairwomen you're going to meet, and don't dare get on an elevator with her if it's a members-only elevator. She'll chase you off. So those are the full committee responsibilities, and if the bill is something that you're interested in, write the members of the chair of the committee, the members of the committee, find out if your congressman's on the committee, and if they're not, you can write them anyway. The most important person to write is your own congressman, because if you're from outside their district, they're not going to give it as much weight if you're writing them.
Yeah, what I like to tell people is that unless you can somehow email them or write them from their district. All right, so it's important to focus on things like committee chairs, subcommittee chairs, and obviously your representative, because those are the people that are making the decisions on the bills as they go through.
Right.
Okay, so explain this process, because again, know how it works in Virginia, not as sure how it works here. DOGE comes down and says, hey, guess what, Congress? Joe Biden gave $2 billion that you guys intended for clean energy or whatever else it was. Joe Biden decided that a great use of that $2 billion would be to give it to Stacey Abrams, the fake governor of Georgia, in order to buy votes. I mean, give people energy efficient appliances. And so DOGE recognizes this, right? And says, hey, I don't think anybody intended this. Well, I don't think any of you guys intended to spend
Exactly.
it this way. President says freeze that right there. Now there's some legal issues here. We already saw a Supreme Court decision on one of them where it said, nope, you got to send out the $2 billion. Doesn't matter if you think it's wasteful. It was allocated by Congress in such a way that it has to be spent on that. And contracts have already been signed or whatever else it was. But now let's say you got one where, okay, President Trump can freeze it, but that's all he can do at this point.
Right.
How does the identification of, we'll just use this specific use case, $2 billion being spent a particular way, you don't want to spend it that way. What is now the congressional process to either pull the money back or send it back to Treasury? Like, what has to happen in order to do that?
So there's a big fight right now where we're arguing that Trump and his administration have the right and the legal ability to stop that grant, which has been authorized, pull it back, and reallocate it under the unitary executive theory where he is the chief executive. And Congress can dictate how the money is spent, and it is the job of the executive to spend the money according to Congress. But Congress has given away so much of its Article 1 authority to the executive branch and essentially said, passed a bill that said, go create grant programs that support clean energy, and left it to the agency to make the rules. So the agency makes the rules, and they are the ones who allocate these grants and approve them. So they have the power to bring it back if there's fraud, if there's abuse. Of course they have that power. So for the Democrats to challenge that is ridiculous. So what DOGE is doing is exactly right. Pull back the money. If they can't reallocate it, then hold on to it. Congress first can take it back in the same fiscal year under what's called rescission. So we can pass a rescissions bill, goes to the House, goes to the Senate, signed by the president, to take back a bunch of that money to Congress, and then we can decide whether to put it to deficit reduction, put it to the extension of the Trump tax cuts, put it to whatever. But it's up to Congress to ultimately decide whether they want to do a rescissions bill and then move on to the appropriations process.
So let me ask you about that. So there are some areas where I think you can make a very, very good legal constitutional argument that you can pull the money back and the president has full authority to reallocate it within the purpose that it was assigned.
Right.
So we can say, sorry, Stacey, you don't get $2 billion to go buy votes in Georgia, but that money still has to be spent on that category. It's not like you can take it and say, no, now I want to spend it on education or now I want to spend it on defense. So that rescission process, so here's my question. How are there already rescission bills that are going through Congress right now, or is that still something that's in the works?
That is something that's in the works. So the first and most important thing was to not shut down the government and hobble Trump's efforts to remake the executive, as he's doing with DOGE, pushing the limits on what his executive branch authority is. We want that to continue. So the continuing resolution was important. It froze spending in current levels and added a little bit more for the border. But now that we're past that point, we're working on reconciliation, which is a 10-year process to extend the tax cuts, very overarching with lots of very, very big numbers. We've directed each committee to save a certain amount so that we can extend the Trump tax cuts. And that process is going to be happening in the background while just the appropriations process for the next 2 years gets started. Now, rescissions is on top of that. Yeah. So on top of reconciliation, on top of just the next 2-year appropriations process is if we want to claw back any of that money that has been found by DOGE.
Okay, so the way to think about this is to put it in kind of 2 categories, right? Rescission is for stuff that you want to do based off of the CR, the continuing resolution from fiscal year 25.
Right.
So that's pulling back any money that hasn't already been spent, is still sitting there like waiting to go into like maybe one of these BS grant programs, something like that.
Green New Deal is still large and in effect, and Trump's doing his best to stop it from being spent. But once it's stopped, let's see what we can either reallocate or pull it back.
So the rescission is just for the stuff that's already there.
Right.
And the hope is that what you're now building is a budget going forward where you're not going to need a bunch of rescission because you've now, okay, so
exactly.
It's kind of that clean break between fiscal year 25, fiscal year 26.
Yep.
Now here's the other question. What does the process look like right now? Because you've got DOGE, you've got a DOGE like committee or caucus, but then you've got your actual standing committees, things like appropriations, House budget bill.
Where the same squishy Republicans have been on for years before and are on now and will be resisting a lot of that. Because our problem's not just going to be the Democrats. It's not just going to be Chuck Schumer and a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. It's going to be our own Republicans who liked the old ways, who don't want to start from lower levels like pre-COVID spending levels. Let's start, say, where Trump left off. And that would be a good place. We'd get a lot of savings, be close to a balanced budget if we could start at pre-COVID levels and incorporate all the DOGE savings.
So let's say this. You guys are at the same point that you're working on how do we fix this going forward. You're also working on how do we fix what was already screwed up by the previous administration. So DOGE identifies, we're just going to use that $2 billion, and we're going to assume that $2 billion is actually ripe for rescission.
Okay.
So DOGE identifies it. What does the House do at this point in order to get that bill started?
Include it in a rescissions bill, which you will probably see negotiations on over the next couple of months as the appropriations bills are moving. So you almost have a 3-track process where you have the 10-year reconciliation bill happening in the background. You have the next year's appropriations bill happening in the background. And then you have the rescissions bill kind of here and now. And so hopefully we'll see rescissions being pulled back in, but appropriations needs to be talking to DOGE so that we can incorporate as much of the savings into our appropriations bills and start from a good point. We don't want to just, if we don't talk to DOGE, the appropriators will just start from last year, which is Biden spending levels, Pelosi spending levels. We don't want to do that. We don't want to just continue at where we left off. So we want to start from a lower spending level, and Chairman Cole has indicated he wants to too.
Okay. And so, all right, so when you say that gets made part of a rescission bill, so I mentioned like the $2 billion for Stacey Abrams, it's part of a rescission bill. So a rescission bill is not something where we're talking about like a single thing. We're talking about like a bill that would include, would that be
all the savings? Yeah.
So basically, you could have one like, for lack of a better term, omnibus rescission bill that would include all of the rescissions that have been identified, and that would go through and it'd just be like one vote.
Sure, and you have to get 60 votes in the Senate. So unfortunately, there would have to be Democrat votes. That's why it's going to be hard to do.
So let me ask you this. Now, the one thing that actually works in our favor, because again, as you mentioned, there's big spenders on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. But I would think that the rescission would be an easier sell for Republican big spenders. What you're essentially saying is we're going to pull money back that was, let's say at a minimum wasteful, or what we would consider to be wasteful. Well, that adds to what they actually have the ability to potentially appropriate going forward. So do you think there's more, even for big spenders, do you think there's more incentive to do the rescissions so you can at least have more that you're working with on the new budget?
If you told the Democrats that was where the money was going to go, to them to spend again, then they'd be on board with that, right? But that's not what we want. Those conservatives, those of us in the Freedom Caucus, we want to bank it and put it toward deficit reduction. And so there'll be a fight there, and a rescissions bill probably has a 50-50 shot of passing. Now, that being said, if we can't get it passed and they're just holding on to the money, then we can say, as we do the appropriations bill through regular order, we're just going to take into account that you're sitting on $2 billion
you can reallocate
extra, and we're going to tell you how you're going to spend that now.
So there is two ways that this can potentially be solved.
If rescissions doesn't get done, it's not dead. It just gets worked into the appropriations process.
Now, one of the big questions, too, that a lot of people are wondering about is, again, I go back to the Republicans are used to being disappointed, right? You've done a good job, other people have done a good job of explaining, okay, the reason why the CR was needed and the reason why the CR doesn't have all the cuts that we want to see is because A, A lot of this had to do with Biden's budget and money and spending that got front loaded that you didn't have any control over. B, you didn't want to shut down the government and then, disrupt the process of what DOGE is actually doing to identify more spending and things like that and then C, it's like clean break between Biden years and Trump years. Like, okay.
Right.
But how do we know Republicans are actually going to deliver on that in September? And how do we know we're not going to wind up in September like, oh, well, we really wanted to, but gosh, if we don't do another continuing resolution, do you honestly not want our veterans to get paid? Do you not want our service members to get what they need? Like, what are the things that people can watch to know that process is going forward and on schedule to work in September?
Watch the appropriations bills as they move. They usually about half move easily. Yeah. So the veterans, spending money on veterans, well, everybody votes for that. Yeah. Spending money on highways, everybody votes for that. Yeah. Spending money on the Department of Education, not everybody votes for that, especially in a Republican Congress. So we haven't passed an education spending bill in years. Yeah. So it usually gets rolled into these big omnibus bills. But if these bills are passing by themselves, it means that they have the support of the conservatives in Congress who are voting for them to get them moving. And the other thing is, watch Trump, because this CR is the first CR that has ever passed with Republican votes only. One Democrat voted for it. But, if Trump says, I want spending to be at a lower level, write the bills to this lower level, and pass them, Congress is going to move. It takes the bully pulpit. It takes the leadership to push Congress in a certain direction. And our chairman, Chairman Tom Cole, is ready to write those bills to those lower levels. We just need to get that direction from Trump.
So, all right. So a big part of this is going to be not only the appropriations committees or the money committees in the House and the Senate working with each other, but first and foremost, the president coming down and saying, these are the limits, these are the targets we want to hit.
Yeah.
With the objective being a balanced budget, hopefully within the next year or two.
The objective is to lock in the DOGE savings and DOGE reforms. Okay. And we can do a lot of that through the appropriations process. Not everything, but a lot of it. And so if he directs us to do that, and DOGE works with Congress, we don't hear a lot from them. There's not a lot of talking between DOGE and the congressional committees. If they come up and testify and say, here's what we found, testify to the Appropriations Committee, then we can say, hey, we got this, here's the paperwork. Let's go ahead and put these into the appropriations bills. That's how we're going to get the savings locked in.
Let me ask you this. So a lot of what we've talked about so far is how you cut wasteful spending. But we also know that one of the biggest reasons why you have wasteful spending is not just because politicians, spending money usually gets you reelected. Regardless of what people say, it gets you reelected.
It gets Democrats reelected. I don't think it gets Republicans.
I hope it does.
We don't do a lot of earmarks. Those things have kind of gone away for the most part because Republicans are in control, and we don't see not only do we not see the benefit of spending taxpayer dollars on non-essential government services outside of roads or things like that, but these, I can go into detail about some of these bridge to nowhere type boondoggles, but Republican voters don't respond to them, so we're not doing as many.
But we do have a massive bureaucracy.
Yes.
And as you said before, and totally agree, Congress has kind of abdicated a lot of its responsibility to the federal government when it comes to spending money and when it comes to how that money is spent to achieve certain aims. I think one of the things that has infuriated people the most is this idea that you mean you were taxing me to push an ideological agenda that I despise? Like, not only was I subject to it, I was funding it. And the answer is yes, you were. Why? Because Congress is in a position where it allocates kind of like big buckets of money, and the executive branch decides, oh yeah, this is how I want it spent. And when that's Joe Biden as your executive, you can imagine how that goes.
What's worse is when it's Donald Trump in the first term as the executive pointing in another direction, saying the country's going in a different direction. And this bureaucracy that's dug in, you want to talk about a deep state, saying, no, we're going to work against our president, who is actually our boss, as the chief executive to undermine all of the things he's trying to do by continuing the boondoggles, continuing the reckless.
One of the questions that gets asked a lot is like, okay, great, and we're glad DOGE find all this, but why didn't Congress find all of this? Is that in part because of changes that happened with the way budgeting takes place in Congress, that when you do give the executive branch a big bucket of money and you have this massive federal bureaucracy, it's super easy for them to essentially hide what they're doing. And if you don't have people dedicated to like not just focusing on it, not just like, but actually with the sort of like search engine tools and things like that, the AI, to be able to actually go through and find all of it, it becomes, is that what it is? It was just kind of like this veil between.
It's getting better, and AI is helping, and that's why what is happening right now with DOGE is so revolutionary, because it's for the first time the citizens are getting to see just how dug in this bureaucracy is. But you and I know from years in the State House, the State House was part-time. We were there for 6 weeks, and the lobbyist community was there all year round. The bureaucracy was there all year round. There was this hand-in-glove going on. I remember fighting for a bill called the Yellow Pages test, where essentially if it was in the Yellow Pages, you had to privatize it.
Yeah.
And I would go to the bureaucracy, and they would argue with me. And essentially, one of the lobbyists said, "We don't need to really go to great lengths to fight you on this. We'll just wait you out.
Yeah.
Because you'll cycle through in a couple terms, and the bill will be forgotten, and we won't need to worry about you." That happens here too in Washington, because members go home, members have other priorities, other committees, and so the lobbyists and the bureaucrats work hand in glove to undermine not only the executive but also the legislative branch doing oversight.
So here's the big question, right? Because a lot of this is budget oriented. But if you have a massive bureaucracy, one, it ends up justifying massive budgets. And bureaucracies always want to grow, because a lot of the ways that bureaucracies measure success is how many people do they manage and how big their budgets are.
Yep.
So how do we start? And this is, again, the Elon Musk quote, right? Don't make something that shouldn't exist more efficient. Just get rid of it.
Right.
So what is going to be the process for not just looking at this from a budgetary standpoint, but from an actual Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution? Why are we even doing this at the federal level position?
I think that because there's so much agreement with the administration on what is a core priority of government and what is not, that what DOGE is doing, we are in line with a lot of the discussions about, well, USAID, scale it back as much as possible. The Department of Education, let's transfer the authority to the states, give the money to the states for Title I and for student loans and things to other departments. And so you can get rid of the woke in the Pentagon. You can, so because there's that agreement, move as aggressively as possible. We support the president leaning in on making these changes now, because we recognize that once the lawsuits get cranked up, legitimate or not, and once the bureaucrats get dug in, the unions for federal employees, which is a whole other topic I can talk about, but I won't, get dug in, you're going to have a hard time making those changes. So because they have the bureaucracy and the Democrats on their heels, Congress is watching supportively, and we're waiting so that as we start this new cycle, if we can get some information from DOGE, we'll be able to support this going forward.
So there needs to be closer coordination, because again, and correct me on this, because I've heard it referred to as a DOGE caucus, I've heard it referred to as a DOGE committee. I mean, are we talking about like an actual, no kidding, temporary committee set up by the House of Representatives?
Yes.
Okay.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene is chairing the DOGE subcommittee of the Oversight Committee, which is real legit. She's doing a great job.
Yeah.
And hopefully a lot of that can come up there, and she can showcase a lot of what DOGE is doing. But there needs to be more coordination, especially with spending committees, because we need to incorporate that.
Yeah.
And we need the actual facts from DOGE on where they're finding it, what line item in the budget we need to zero out or reduce. So moving forward, we're not just doing the same old thing.
So it's one of the things that would be helpful. And look, I think DOGE is doing great work, but again, the communication between the legislators is absolutely critical. So it is, I mean, it's great to have a DOGE committee. It's great to have a DOGE subcommittee under Marjorie and Oversight. And then, the work that Congressman Sessions is doing and what.
Oh, with his DOGE caucus?
Yeah.
I'm a member of the caucus, but that's just members at large being supportive of what DOGE is.
Well, and look, we know, we all know that there's some caucuses that are, hey,
there's 1,000 caucuses.
We're the Green Energy Caucus, or we're the this caucus, or we're the that caucus. And then there's some that actually do some work. Like the Conservative Caucus in the House did some work. The Military and Veterans Caucus in the House did some work. Mm-hmm. So would you say that one of the most important things that is probably needed right now is for members of each standing committee to have like a very close tie, whether it's the chairman or the vice, somebody that is kind of focused both on the committee side and on the DOGE side with respect to how this process has to work?
I don't think it would be too much for each major standing committee to have a separate DOGE subcommittee.
Yeah.
So that within transportation, let's look at how DOGE is working in the transportation department. And then they can also work with the transportation spending subcommittee on appropriations to say, well, here's what we're changing, and here's how you save the money and get it actually into law that we're not going to spend like we have in the past.
Well, the other thing too that's important here, and we both experienced this, you on a much larger level than I have, but I've worked with outside groups before that were trying to do things like DOGE is doing right now. Mm-hmm. And depending on how tied in they were with how the process actually works, had a great deal of impact on how successful they were. Mm-hmm. I've had bills before that my supporters...
You've had some good ideas.
My supporters killed the bill because of the way they showed up to testify. Right? And we all know what happens, right? I'll never forget this. I had a food freedom bill. Uh-huh. And we had some wonderful people that showed up to testify, but they didn't realize...
Joel Salatin.
Well, Joel, I love Joel. Joel, I wish I would have had Joel there.
He's a constituent. He's a great guy.
Yeah, I wish I would have Joel there. But no, I had a food freedom bill, and I had people show up, and it was at the last minute. We had done no coordination beforehand. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know me.
Oh, yeah.
They showed it up a subcommittee, and they didn't realize it's like you've got like 60 seconds to provide your testimony. And if you spend half of it talking about what you wish the bill did, well, you just killed it.
Marijuana legalization or something like that, whatever that is.
You just killed it, right?
Something totally unrelated.
So, and the reason why I point this out is because I think, what you're saying here cannot be understated. There's going to be a lot of things that DOGE does that from the outside looking in, it's like, well, this is stupid, just get rid of it. And it's like, okay, no, you need to work with us so we can show you the process for how you can actually achieve it. And the more information you're giving us, the more early on, we can help you how to navigate that. And this is the other thing I really want to get out of this. So many people watching this are going to be like, great, I understand a little bit more about the process. What do I do? Between now and September, there's going to be a lot of important work to be done. The closer we get to midterms, the more nervous certain members get based off of their districts. If I'm the average constituent and I want to help with this, and maybe I got 20,000 followers on X, and I want to put out this stuff. What should they be doing from maybe like a new media perspective, or maybe in interacting with their congressional, representation? What should they be doing to maximize their effort? Not just signing onto a form letter, maximizing their effort.
So find out if your congressperson is cool with DOGE. Yeah. That's kind of if they are not, then you got to go elsewhere. If they are, work through them, because they've got staffers who are excited about what's happening in DOGE and are trying to be part of it and to help. So if you have ideas, reach out to your congressman and give your ideas to them. DOGE has the ability for you to submit suggestions to them on where you see waste, fraud, and abuse. So I would encourage them to go there, but also new media is showing the whole world exactly where the greatest influencers are and who is the greatest at influencing the DOGE process. You're one of those, but there are others who are also focused in on DOGE like a laser beam. Support them, support their efforts, and the groups that are kind of not governmental, but also supporting what DOGE is doing. Support the president in his efforts to push DOGE, and and hopefully you'll see some results coming out of this Congress here this summer. And if you don't, then you need to hold members accountable for ignoring what DOGE is doing or working against what the president's agenda is.
Well, the thing I've been excited about so far is that I've had an opportunity to talk with members of the administration, to include the White House press secretary, the vice president.
You've talked to more cabinet officials than I have.
Others, and
famous, man.
And Speaker Johnson as well. And all of them have given the same indication, and that is, look, we want to move as far as we can, as fast as we can. We're not trying to wait for midterms. We're trying to do all of that now. I really appreciate you running through this process, because that's been one of the things that have really confused people. Like, we know there's fraud, we know there's waste, we know there's abuse, we know DOGE is doing things. How the heck are we supposed to track what is going on? So I really appreciate that. I also want to I'm going to throw in my own little pitch here, going off of what Congressman Cline just said, is that it is really important that we understand, again, the power that new media has in this entire process. Because one of the biggest things that we're going to run into, I will keep saying this until I'm blue in the face, one of the big things that we're going to run into, as soon as they're trying to actually balance budgets, right? This September, we're talking about major efforts to balance budgets, reduce the size of the federal government. The moment you do that, the left is going to come out with, you want grandma to die, and I can't believe you fired all these wonderful, great, federal workers, and look, maybe some of them are, but that doesn't mean we can afford this massive bureaucracy, nor should a free republic have a massive bureaucracy. So one of the things that I'm going to encourage you all to do is, again, make sure that you're getting out there, that you find people and organizations that you trust that are working on this, and you amplify their voice and work through those people and organizations that are focused on this. Because we saw that a lot as well. I used to tell my constituents all the time, find an organization that you trust, that knows how this place works, because they're going to give you the alerts, they're going to give you the updates, they're going to tell you who to call, when to call, and all of that. I'd also encourage everyone to follow the people that are actually trying to do this job down here. I've known Congressman Cline for, since 2016 or 2016.
Yeah, before either of us had gray hair.
Yeah, worked with him well. And
At least we still have hair.
Yeah, right? And I've always known him to be a man of his word. So where can people follow you on X, on...
So Rep Ben Cline is the handle for X, for Facebook, for Instagram, and offline it's Cline for the number 4 Virginia is the non-governmental angle. But the Freedom Caucus is working very closely with the president to maximize the influence of DOGE. So there are 30 odd members of the Freedom Caucus, and yes, some of us are odd, but 30 to 35 members, and I would say look through their social media and see what they're focused on, because some of us are focused on different things. Chip Roy does a great job of focusing in on budget numbers, and Michael Cloud and several others. So I would look at individual members of Freedom Caucus too, but we'll keep fighting and working with this administration to maximize the effect of DOGE and actually change the direction that we're going.
Well, and that the last little thing I'll say on that too is, I know that people are rightfully skeptical of elected officials, and good, you should be. But when you do find the ones that are working hard and have been taking the slings and arrows for quite some time, and now this is finally their opportunity, by all means, hold everyone accountable when they deserve accountability, but also give them support when they've earned it. Give them support when they've earned it, because this can be a very lonely fight. I was proud to stand alongside you when we were making that fight in the House of Delegates in Virginia, and I'm glad to see you've continued it up here.
Good to see you, man. You're doing great.
You too. All right, once again, thank you very much for watching DOGE Watch and this extension, DOGE Talks. Please let us know what you think. Like and subscribe, and share it if you found value in this and you think it could bring value to other people. Once again, I'm Nick Freitas. Thank you very much. We'll see you next episode.